Hey everyone. I'm going to start trying something a little bit new. Most weeks, Lord willing, I'd like to do kind of a midweek video to kind of prep us for what's coming up on Sunday for the message. And this week, this past Sunday, I talked about how in Matthew chapter 19 there are two stories about encounters that Jesus has. And both of these stories seem like completely different stories that have nothing to do with one another. But Matthew, in Matthew 19, includes, as I had pointed out, 7 different corollary devices that connect these stories together. And I just wanted to list these out and kind of give you a heads up. The next passage we're going to be looking at is from chapter 19, verses 16 through 30. And I want to give you an opportunity to open your own Bibles and see if you can find these connecting points. I'll point out to you the points, but I want to see if you can look through this chapter and see if you can find these points in the next passage. Again, those are verses 16 through 30. The first connecting point is that both of these stories open with a question posed by one of society's elite members or groups. For instance, last week we saw the question was initiated by the Pharisees. Who initiated the question this week? Maybe you can look through and see if you can find that yourself. Second, out of the 7 points, both of these stories include a reflection on the acceptance of and obedience to the Old Testament law concerning the subject matter. See if you can find that. Third, both of these stories reveal that acceptance of and obedience to the Old Testament laws being referenced were not sufficient to really please God. Now, these were pointed out by Jesus. So look for a statement by Jesus that reveals that their adherence to the Old Testament laws being referenced was not enough for them to gain eternal life. Fourth, both of these stories tell about the hardness of a man's heart concerning actually following after the heart of God. Jesus again points out something, and we also see a reaction by the party in question that reveals that the man's heart was just too hard to actually follow after the heart of God. See if you can find that point in this story. Fifth, both of these stories include a teaching by Jesus that challenged the societal norms concerning how the law was taught and handled. That might be a little bit more difficult. Just as a hint, look at verses 21 and 23 to 24 and see if you can point that out again. I'll read that again. Both of these stories include a teaching by Jesus that challenged the societal norms concerning how the Old Testament law was taught and handled. Sixth, both of these stories include an exasperated response by Christ's disciples. In that response reveals just how radical Christ's statements were to social norms of that day. So see if you can find that exasperated response by the disciples. And lastly, seventh, both of these stories conclude with insights into a spiritual dimension of God's kingdom. They're dealing with a very tangible issue with a person standing right in front of them, but Jesus concludes both of these stories with some spiritual insight that is less tangible, but not any less applicable and relatable and worthy of our attention. So these are the 7 points that I introduced on Sunday, and they kind of served as the outline for the message. Sunday's message centered around divorce, and it was a very sensitive subject, but I hope that it was at least helpful. This next message is going to be about gaining eternal life. So go through, see if you can find these 7 points, and it'll help you get a little head start on the passage for Sunday. Thanks.